BBC Radio Kent.
The Conversation on BBC Radio Kent with Dominic King.
He's a very busy man. Joining us back on The Conversation, Sunil Rupasinha, who is a specialist barrister who runs a boutique road traffic defence practice, Kent Traffic Law, out of Maidstone. Good to see you again. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you, Dominic.
Do you know, we started at the beginning of you launching, actually, Kent Traffic Law, and you came in to see me on this programme and talk about what you were doing. We should just explain to people why it's become necessary for you to actually run a business like this.
Well, I was a criminal barrister for 20 plus years, prosecuting or defending everything from common assault to murder. But all of that work, whether you prosecute or you defend, is publicly funded. And over the years, the rates of pay have diminished dramatically. And although people normally don't have sympathy for lawyers, anyone who's following the news now will realise that criminal barristers are actually, in inverted commas, going on strike. So they're not now accepting new instructions. And that's the truth is, it really is a devastatingly bad situation, which is why I decided to leave it a few years ago.
So when we see those dramas like Silk, that's not the reality for many of those who are in the law.
You know, cross-examination and jury speeches are great fun, but that's the real romantic end of it. That's the real great bit that you love to do. 99% is hard graft, reading through papers, sometimes hundreds, thousands of pages. And when they changed the rules halfway through the period when I started to you were paid on the evidence only that they're actually using, the unused material which could dwarf the evidence, suddenly you didn't get paid to look through. And that's why today's barristers are so upset and why I'm pleased I left a few years ago.
And then you set up Kent Traffic Law, and it is primarily to look at those traffic offences. So what sort of things are we looking at that people would come to you because they've got in trouble with the law?
So whether it's speeding to drink driving or anything in between, whether people wish to plead not guilty and avoid a conviction or guilty and avoid a disqualification, I can represent them. But it's only for criminal prosecutions, so not parking tickets or vehicle tax. So typically, most of my clients, to be frank, are guilty pleas, whether it's drink driving, speeding, those kind of things. And they're trying to either get a shorter ban than they might or possibly avoid a ban. At the top end of the scale, if it's drink driving and it's quite high reading, they're trying to avoid prison and get maybe a community service order. If they're in the kind of community service order bracket, they're trying to avoid that and maybe get a fine and a ban.
And we've talked about this before, but I'm always interested about it. Effectively, you know, people listening might think, so you might get them off of a sentence that they should get a higher sentence for.
It's only
Deep
right.
breath.
It's only right that a court which is sentencing takes all matters into account from after having listened to both the Crown and the defence. It would be wrong, wouldn't it, if they only listened to the Crown, the prosecution version? That's not justice. Here we have justice.
That's the answer I'm sure you have to give as a stock thing every time. It's great having you on, as always. Before we get into some of the interesting news stories surrounding situations on the roads, which is primarily what you do for a living, let's just catch up with, you've just been on a family holiday, haven't you? Where have you been?
It's just myself and the wife. We went to Dublin for a week. I just wanted a break from work, and so off we went. But
you had some interesting. I mean, anyone who goes to Dublin is going to have a great time anyway, aren't they? Let's be honest. You know, you've got loads going on there. Lots of great events in pubs and all the rest. But I was really interested that you looked into some of the history side. Now, last night on the programme, speaking to an author who was with us, Molly Green, she was talking about going to Dunkirk and seeing some of the, especially with like 3 veterans. She went on a tour of looking at that area and what happened, and the little ships, all the rest of it, and the story that followed on. You've looked on your trip at some of the events of the Easter Uprising in 1916, and we'll go to Belfast in a second, but let's start off there.
So the centre of that uprising was the General Post Office, right in the centre of Dublin. The uprising was quickly put down by the British, and those that were caught were taken mainly to Kilmunham Jail, where some of them were executed. And it's very interesting looking at that jail, the conditions in which they were kept, the way in which some of those men were executed. In fact, it was perceived as so brutal at the time that it actually gave a significant boost to republicanism.
Was it really surreal as well to be there and to be? I mean, I always think of these tours that people have. It's living history because it's not that far away from us. If we think of 1916, that's not very long.
Well, you see the connection because we actually went on a tour to Belfast, amongst other places. And in Belfast, we had a choice of having a tour of the Titanic Museum or being taken around some of the former hotspots in Belfast by a local taxi driver. So we opted for the trip with the local taxi driver.
So you went down the Falls Road?
And Shank Hill. We saw the Peace Wall, the murals. You see the very high gated communities, some of them to keep the communities apart. And you look at the murals on one side, you hear the stories about them from the guide. You go through the gates, which are there to keep the communities literally apart at times of tension. They're literally locked at night at times of tension. You go to the other side and you see murals depicting the other side of the story. And it's fascinating because you can then trace back that thread right back to 1916, and indeed you can go back.
So you were having an experience where you literally were seeing that part and then coming up to a more contemporary time, the peace talks bringing it up to today, and where sort of West Belfast, Republican West Belfast, Protestant West Belfast is now.
So it makes you realise it's still relevant. So just digressing slightly into this Brexit issue of the hard border, once you've been around Belfast, you start to understand why the Irish might not want any infrastructure of a hard border. When you go north, it says welcome to Northern Ireland. When you go south, there's no such sign. A little hint from the Irish that they see it as a unified island.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens come Brexit, and we'll leave that for another day. Thank you for being with us tonight on BBC Radio Kent, Specialist Barrister Sunil Rupasinha, who's with me here in the studio from Kent Traffic Law. So let's get on to some of the other topics that have been going on today. Speed factor in around half of fatal collisions. Growing number of volunteers now around the country are arming themselves with speed guns to act as a deterrent. We spent some time with some of them there in Faversham today with our reporter Joe Byrne. A question posed, I guess, is are speed watch groups just policing on the cheap? Do we need more roads police? Where do you stand on this?
So I wouldn't describe it as policing as such because they don't prosecute you. Generally speaking, if they catch you twice, they pass your name on to the police and you might get a warning letter. And the stats are showing from the Kent scheme that usually that's sufficient to stop those drivers speeding again.
But the police don't prosecute you, do they? They just hand it on to someone like the Crown Prosecution Service.
Well, the Kent Speedwatch scheme, you're not going to be prosecuted if you.
No, I understand.
And generally speaking, yeah, of course, if the police catch you otherwise, they would pass it on to the CPS. Yeah.
And the idea of people sort of volunteering, taking up that challenge that is needed, because the police clearly can't be around with a speed gun every avenue part of a country road here in Kent, can they?
Well, to my mind, these volunteers are providing a helpful service. I mean, it reduces noise pollution, carbon emissions, keeps the roads safer, saves police to do duties. I mean, we have a shortage of police, so if it saves police time and money, surely it's a good thing.
Penalty points has come up, isn't it? And it's something that you're very keen to talk about. Is it fair for drivers to be disqualified for 6 months just because they reach 12 penalty points on their licences? Now, I'm sure there'll be lots of people sitting there thinking, how many points on your licence do you have, and can you deal with that? Some people won't have any at all. I will fess up to saying I, for many, many, many years, didn't have any and was so, saying to my brothers and my sister, I've never had any penalty points, and they have. And then I got 3 penalty points, which is on my licence. So, because sometimes you just can go slightly over on a speed camera, can't you, from that 30 to 31?
Well, people probably don't have too much sympathy for people who get to 12 points because you have to commit a series of offences to get there. But at the margins, I have had, for example, my very first client when I started Kent Traffic Law, middle-aged lady, she'd never gone above 36. She had 3 fixed penalties for speeding in a 30-mile-an-hour limit, and on the 4th one, they called her in for a minimum 6-month ban. So, yeah, I understand she broke the law 4 times, but hardly a dangerous driver as such.
So take us through the rules on this. So if drivers accumulate 12 or more points for offences committed within 3 years of each other, they face a minimum of 6-month ban. That's where it currently is?
That's the basic rule.
Basic, right. And then what's the reality that you find when you're in the court system?
So when people come to me, if they know they're going to get to 12 points, they call me up and say, effectively, Sunil, is there any way I can avoid this ban? Each case turns on its own facts, but if the courts would take the view that an individual would suffer from what's termed exceptional hardship, and how that's defined is interpreted is based on case law, if the courts consider that to ban someone for 6 months would cause exceptional hardship, they have a discretion either not to ban or to ban for a lesser period.
So, someone who hardly ever does anything wrong, a model citizen, but goes 35 in a 30 where, and I'm going to have the speed camera in as well, because that's the bit where they're caught, I guess, if someone isn't there with a speed gun. And we can't use the volunteers because they haven't got any powers. So if that happens, are they more likely, if that person has previously got points, going to be more lenient, or are they just going to say, you just shouldn't have done it?
So take the lady who never exceeded 36 miles an hour. That isn't something you can put forward to try to avoid a ban, because the court take the view, or the law is, you've got to 12 points. How you got there is not the point. Once you get to 12, you have to suffer from what they term exceptional hardship if they're going to exercise a discretion not to ban, or to ban for a shorter period.
Do you think speed cameras, like many people say whenever we do a phone in here on BBC Radio Kent about it, are cash cows? Do you think that's what they are?
I personally don't look at it like that, because if they weren't there, there'd be an awful lot more speeding on those roads. And you've just said earlier on that half of the fatalities are connected with speeding.
But don't on speed cameras, some people, I'm just throwing the controversy here, don't people speed... bring their speed down as the camera is there, and they speed up again after they've gone past the camera.
Yeah, they're not perfect, but at
least they do something.
Exactly. And because of otherwise, how are people getting to 12 points? Because there aren't enough police on the roads to catch people for speeding over 30 4 times in a row. So the cameras are providing a useful public service, I would have said.
Sunil, over the bank holiday weekend, this another story in the news, 6 tons of rubbish left on Margate Beach. It doesn't include the waste bins. It was at Viking Bay, 2 tons pulled from the beach. Thanet District Council just confirming all of that with us today. And just the idea, I mean, everyone has seen the YouTube video, haven't they, of all the plastics and the plastic islands that have developed around the world. It is astonishing, isn't it, what we do? I wouldn't say I'm in any way some sort of big green activist. I do my recycling at home like everybody else, I'm sure, these days. But I also know that, I will grab a drink and have a straw in it, and then you realise that actually that straw is pointless, isn't it? And it's just adding to the plastic mountain.
Yeah, I suppose public awareness of the potential damage from things like straws is only recently coming upon us. But public awareness that it's wrong to dump rubbish on beaches, we all know. Why do people do that? They wouldn't do it in their own garden. But there's the additional point nowadays that if you look at pollution worldwide in the seas, this is a very, very serious issue. I mean, why should we bequeath to our children polluted seas? Because there are now a vast amount of plastic in the world's ocean. It will literally take many, many, many decades to break down completely. In the meantime, it's turning into microplastics, which are being ingested by marine life. Now, the people who drop plastic on the seaside, are they not thinking, I don't particularly want to eat fish with plastic in it? And if they're not bothered about themselves, what about the children and what they're bequeathing to future generations?
But I think it's really interesting that you talk about these microplastics as well. We just didn't have this knowledge, did we? We just didn't realise this was going on. You almost feel like the education for all of us has not really been there in a huge way. You had to almost go and seek it. I know brilliant organisations, Keep Britain Tidy have done good stuff and all the rest, but it's almost been a nicety, don't you think, to say it would be really lovely, a very British thing, isn't it? It'd be really lovely if you maybe put your rubbish in a bin, rather than actually saying put your rubbish in a bin, because you're actually destroying what we've got in our society and what's around us.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the problem has become so severe before we've been alerted to it. I think that's a tragedy, because now what do we do with all that plastic in the sea? So yeah, big issue. I think personally the world should take it more seriously.
It's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for being with us on BBC Radio Kent, as always, and continued success with what you do here in Kent as a business owner as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Dominic. Appreciate it.
Sunil Rupasinha on BBC Radio Kent from Kent Traffic Law.
There is only one